For a while, Sonic didn't have a quality problem. He had a personality and laziness problem. The games were more stable, they reviewed better, and they were way less broken than before. But at the same time, something felt off. The stories felt lighter, the characters felt different, and the series started leaning more on jokes than anything else. And that entire shift is what defines what fans call the meta era. Before we get into this era, we need to quickly talk about where Sonic was at before it started. From 2001 to around 2009, the series was all over the place. After Sonic Adventure 2, Sega left the console market, and Sonic basically lost a consistent direction. You had games experimenting with everything: tone, gameplay, structure, sometimes all at once. And one game would try to be serious and story-driven, but the next would throw Sonic into something completely different. And then you had Sonic 06, which didn't just miss the mark, it kind of reset expectations entirely. And at that point, it wasn't just about whether a Sonic game was good or bad. People just weren't sure what they were going to get anymore. And that's important, because the meta era is basically a response to that. Around 2010, Sega made a pretty clear shift. Instead of trying to go bigger, they scaled things back. Simpler stories, lighter tone, and more focus on gameplay being immediately fun. And you can tell this wasn't accidental. After years of trying to reinvent Sonic, this feels more like Sega saying, alright, let's just make something that works. And that shift really starts with Sonic Colors in 2010. And honestly, the first thing you notice is how focused it feels. Levels are a lot more structured, the gameplay is tight, and there's less of that we tried 5 ideas at once. And there's the tone, the story is way more comedic, there's a lot more dialogue, and Sonic himself is
Baldy nose hair!
Different. He's more sarcastic, he's constantly making comments, and half the time it feels like he's entertaining himself as much as the player. Which, to be fair, does fit his character. Sonic has always been confident, but now he actually sounds like it all the time. And after the Dark Age, this worked. The game reviewed well, fans liked it, and it felt like Sonic finally had a stable direction again. But at the same time, this is where a new issue starts to show up. Because from here on out, the writing changes in a really noticeable way. It becomes way more self-aware. Characters don't really react to things with the same level of seriousness. The stakes feel lower, and a lot of scenes are built around humor first. It's not that Sonic never had jokes before, no. But now it feels like the jokes are the main focus. It's like the series went from story with some humor to humor with a story. And again, coming off something like Sonic 06, you can kind of see why they did that, It's just a very different direction. And then in 2011, we get Sonic Generations, and to me this is easily the high point of this era. The whole game is built around Sonic's history, classic Sonic, modern Sonic, all levels brought back with new mechanics. It's literally a playable anniversary celebration, and it works really well. The gameplay is solid, the presentation is strong, and for once both old and new fans had something to enjoy. But this is also where another pattern starts, because instead of pushing forward with new content, the series started leaning more on nostalgia. And don't get me wrong, okay? Nostalgia isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when one of your biggest successes is built on the past, it's very easy to keep going back to it, and that kind of starts a problem. Then in 2013, we get Sonic Lost World, and this one's kind of hard to pin down because it is experimental, but just not in the same way as before. Movement is slower and more controlled, but the level design is very different, yet very basic to an extent that isn't enjoyable to me. It's basically just a Mario Galaxy ripoff if you just take a look. Like, no brutal way to say it, just it's a Mario Galaxy ripoff. And it feels like Sonic is just trying to fit into a completely different style of platforming right now, which is interesting but also kind of awkward. And the tone, it doesn't really change much from previous games. It's still light, comedic, and not taking itself too seriously. So the response ends up being pretty mixed, okay? Like, it's not bad enough to be a disaster, but it's not strong enough to really push the series forward. To me, it's one of the most mid games when it comes to Sonic. And then in 2017, we get Sonic Forces. And this is where a lot of the criticism of the meta era really peaks. Because on paper, this sounds like exactly what fans had been asking for. A darker story, a world taken over by Eggman, and actual stakes. But when you play it, it doesn't really commit to that idea. The story is mad rushed, the levels are very short, and the tone is kind of split between serious and lighthearted. And you'll have moments where the game wants to feel intense, but then immediately undercuts it, which ends up making everything feel a bit flat. And it's not broken and it's not unplayable, but it's just completely underwhelming. And to me, when a game's underwhelming, it's worse because I'd rather have a game that's broken and unplayable, but still fun, and I think Sonic 06 can define that. If you watched my stream yesterday, I would have said many times that I still really enjoyed playing this game, but when I played a game like Sonic Forces, I find almost no enjoyment in it because there's nothing really unique about it. It's just such an underwhelming game that provides nothing unique to it. So when you step back and look at this entire period, you see that the meta era isn't really defined by failure, but rather is defined by overcorrection. Because after being too experimental, you can see that the series instead became super safe. It became the tone, the tone was super light, and the result is, yes, it's more stable, but at the same time, it's less ambitious compared to the Dark Age. Like it's always playing just a bit safe and never quite pushing as far as it really could have. And I think Sonic Forces is a great example of when a game plays it far too safe. And to be fair, that approach that the meta era took did help, but only for a short amount of time, because people started wanting more again. And it wasn't just about consistency, but it was also about effort, because instead of just avoiding mistakes of previous installments by playing it extra safe, people want ambitious storytelling that shows Sega took risks while also being consistent and balanced. And eventually, that shift does start to happen, because the next era, aka the Renaissance era, it doesn't just play it safe. It tries to bring everything back, the tone, the storytelling, the ambition, but also playing it in such a way that mixes the best of both meta and dark. And for the first time in a long time, it actually feels like Sonic knows what it wants to be again. So yeah, that's basically the meta era. It wasn't exactly the worst period for Sonic, but definitely one that played things a little too safe. It fixed a lot of the problems from before, but at the same time it created new ones. And that's just my personal take on it. Let me know what you guys think. Did you guys like this era, or do you think it held Sonic back? And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe. I'll be covering another era really soon. Thanks for watching, and remember, I'm actually a Sonic channel.